Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Rose Report. Tonight, my guest is Hannah, who's a pro-life activist in Canada. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to talk to you because obviously you are a pro-life activist, and we have had the overturning of Roe v. Wade here in the United States. And I've been interested to see how that's going to affect the international community when it comes to abortion, because abortion is legal in Canada up to a point. So just to start off, what is the feeling sort of in the air in Canada around abortion? Is it something that's widely accepted? Is it still controversial? What's the situation?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So it depends, what community you're looking at, here in Canada. But I would say, generally speaking, most Canadians are okay with abortion, at least to a certain time in pregnancy. There have been studies done to kind of gauge Canadians' perception of sex-selective abortion. So around 80% of Canadians are against sex-selective abortion and would be supportive of legislation to prevent that. So there have been a couple of bills brought forward in the House of Commons here in Canada, in our capital, to ban sex-selective abortion, but unfortunately, because we have a Liberal majority government right now, and they've also partnered with the New Democratic Party, which is the Socialist Party. Those bills that some conservative MPs have brought forward have been basically squashed. But generally speaking, I would say that when it comes to Roe v. Wade, a lot of Canadians, I guess, a lot of Americans don't really know what's going on here in Canada, and a lot of Canadians are very fascinated with what is happening in the US, but they're also afraid of any of the effects of Roe v. Wade being overturned coming here to Canada, because unfortunately Canada is a very left-wing country, and the whole my body, my choice, pro-choice movement is very strong. The pro-life movement here in Canada has been making a lot of advances on the ground, changing hearts and minds, but when it comes to legislation, we're quite far behind on the US when it comes to banning abortion, or at least having some restrictions on it. And it's only Canada, North Korea, and China. They're the only three countries in the world where there's no legal restrictions on abortion whatsoever. So even when Roe v. Wade, before it was overturned, the US was still farther ahead of Canada in terms of there being, at least in most states, some limitations on abortion. Here in Canada, you can have an abortion up to the minute before you give birth if you want to. It is hard to find, late-term abortionists here in Canada, but still, abortions into late second trimester are extremely common, unfortunately. To kind of wrap up your question, I would say there's a huge difference in American versus Canadian politics when it comes to abortion, but hopefully some waves of inspiration from the pro-life movement and their victories in the US are going to keep inspiring pro-life activists here in Canada, like myself, not to give up and keep pushing forward.
And in terms of how abortion is protected legally, what is the situation in Canada? Because here, really, what allowed the access throughout all the states was the Supreme Court ruling with Roe v. Wade. How does it work there? Was there a Supreme Court ruling that legalized abortion? Is it enshrined in law? What is the process in Canada?
Yes, so it was in 1989 that there's a Morgentaler case that went through. So Morgentaler was an abortionist here in Canada. And he was kind of forward, unfortunately, for his time of really pushing abortion through all 9 months. And he would do abortions illegally, and he spent time in jail for doing abortions. But then eventually a case went up to the Supreme Court challenging the restrictions on abortion here in Canada. And all abortion restrictions were gotten rid of, and there was a year of time between 1989 and 1990 for the government to kind of have consultations to figure out what pro-life, what legislation they were going to have surrounding abortion. And unfortunately, the pro-life and pro-choice side, the conservative, the liberal sides, couldn't come up to any sort of agreement about what we should do in terms of restrictions surrounding abortion. So once 1990 was over, there have been no legal restrictions surrounding abortion. And unfortunately, most Canadians consider it a constitutional right to be able to have a complete access to abortion. So like when it comes to the laws surrounding abortion, they're different in Canada versus the US. Here it's more federally that our laws are decided. The provinces don't really have a say surrounding abortion. So at the federal level, since 1990, there have been no legal restrictions on abortion. So if things were to change in that regard, we'd have to have, a pro-life bill be put forward in the House of Commons. And then, it'd have to be a conservative government. That being said, even any sort of conservative governments we've had under Stephen Harper, or, potentially with Pierre Poilievre after Justin Trudeau, the Conservative governments are not willing to open up this debate and have their MPs. Sure, you can bring forward a bill, maybe, but if your party is not going to squash it, the opposition is going to squash it. So we have to have more time here in Canada in order for more public opinion to change, and frankly, for public discourse to be much more open about this topic, because so many people are like, oh yeah, the topic of abortion is decided, it's closed, we can't talk about it, due to our very liberal media, especially. But yeah, we need more time for public opinion to change, and for more politicians to be willing to speak on this topic and not be afraid of the media calling them bad names, basically.
And that sort of brings me to my next question, Vein. This is something I don't think a lot of American pro-life activists talk about, is what is the process in Canada? For us here, it was we wanted Roe v. Wade overturned, we wanted the heartbeat bills passed. But in Canada, what is the rallying cry? What is it that needs to be done specifically to have there be a protection of life there?
Yeah, so I mean, it can be done multiple ways. Like a bill could be put forward to enshrine the sanctity of human life, that human life begins at fertilization, and that it'll be a constitutionally protected right. So a bill could be put forward that way, and legislation could be passed. And then there would have to be a government that would be open to that. Or there could be a constitutional challenge that could go up to the Supreme Court to establish a right to life in the Constitution. That potentially could be, an amendment. But I mean, we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees, the right to life. But under Canadian law, a preborn child is not considered a human until it exits its mother's womb and can breathe on its own. So that is kind of the legal precedent that we have here in Canada from different cases that the Supreme Court has ruled on. So that legal precedent would have to be overturned, where human life would be seen as beginning at fertilization, and so therefore, a woman, when she's pregnant with their child, that it's actually considered human, and that your right to life and your bodily autonomy cannot be abridged by another human. It's interesting, Kathy Wagenthal, who's a wonderful Conservative MP in Saskatchewan, a few years ago, she brought forth a bill called Cassie and Molly's Law, because there was a woman here in Canada who was brutally murdered by her boyfriend or husband, I can't remember, and she was pregnant at that time, so both her and her preborn child were killed. I believe that her partner only received, an indictment for killing her and not her preborn child. So this Conservative MP brought forth that bill to try to show that both lives are valuable, but unfortunately the Liberal, and NDP established that they're afraid of any bills that kind of crack open the door, because they know that we as pro-lifers, will take, the banning of sex-selective abortion, or, even the Cassie and Molly's Law type thing as just a step in the direction to completely ban abortion, and they are very well aware of that.
Yeah, and that's something I think they're aware of here as well, that as soon as they give an inch to the pro-life movement, we will try to take a mile, because that's what the job is. And here, Democrats and really liberals have really used abortion as a rallying cry for their side. They use it to fundraise. They used it during all the Supreme Court battles recently with Kavanaugh and Gorsuch and Amy Coney Barrett, to say that if they weren't supported, Roe v. Wade was going to be overturned and abortion was going to be banned. In Canada, do liberal politicians use it in the same way? Is it something that is really used to generate outrage or to generate excitement amongst the liberal voting base?
Yes, absolutely. So the Liberals are actively actually trying to take away charitable status from pro-life pregnancy centers. And it's fascinating. I would say with a lot of liberal politicians, they're more willing to talk about abortion in terms of, we have to make sure we protect these rights. We have to make sure that we defund or, take away charitable status from pro-life pregnancy centers, those types of things. They're more willing to talk about that than many conservatives are about being brave and being bold and open about, no, we're not going to give up this ground. Human life begins at fertilization. We at least need to ban sex-selective abortion or those types of things. So that being said, many liberal politicians are like, when it comes to talking about the, right to abortion or that type of thing, it's a topic that has been settled. We're not going to debate that, women's rights, we can't overturn them, and they don't understand, basically, we're living in such an age of science denial that, you have to tell someone and convince someone that if a child is not wanted, they're still human just as much as a child that's wanted. So, yeah, I would say that liberals are very focused on this issue. And, even if you look at all the stuff that Justin Trudeau is tweeting and Jagmeet Singh and all that are, two federal liberal and NDP politicians. As soon as Roe v. Wade was overturned, they were already dog whistling
Right.
about it and tweeting about it and everything like that. And there's not a lot of conservative politicians that are willing to be like, no, we're going to reopen this topic. Leslie Lewis, she's a conservative MP and she's actually running for the leadership of the Conservative Party right now federally. She is willing to talk about it, and she has, pro-life policies as part of her platform, which is incredibly rare for a conservative politician right now. But basically, I would say when it comes to politics, that's the weakest arm of the pro-life movement here in Canada. I would say the strongest arm is the activism arm, the arm that I've been tremendously involved in on the streets, boots on the ground, changing hearts and minds, and also the crisis pregnancy arm of the pro-life movement. It's quite strong in Canada as well.
And I saw when Roe v. Wade was overturned, Justin Trudeau was right out there saying, this is horrible. This is going to set women back decades. It did not take very long for that to happen. And here in the U.S., one of the responses has been, especially from Senator Warren in Massachusetts, one of the responses has been to target pro-life centers, to try to remove tax status, to try to really shut them down. And it almost seems to me a bit of a revenge tactic. So in Canada, what is that process like? Is there a very large process to target pro-life centers or pregnancy centers?
Well, I would say it's a double-edged sword, but generally speaking, Canadians are often a little bit more reserved when it comes to those types of things. We don't have as many riots and kind of violence, I would say, on a scale that sometimes happens in the US, when it comes to a very hot button social topics like this. But that being said, there are certain pro-choice groups that are tremendously active here in Canada, and they, as far as I know, have not actually gone out and vandalized pro-life pregnancy centers or things like that, but they try to make life as miserable as possible for pro-life activists like myself. So they will, every time we're out on the streets doing activism, they have all their Facebook groups and their whole tentacle arm of a movement, especially in my city here, to make sure that they spot us and they come out and they try to I've been assaulted, those types of things, try to take our signs away, to try to make as much noise and chaos for us as possible. And one thing that they really work to do is to lobby the local governments, whether it's provincially or municipally, to have abortion victim photography banned. And that just happened recently in my city. So they've been very effective at that. In the pro-life movement, we keep pushing back, legally every single time we have won some of those cases, to be able to continue to have, bus advertisements, or to be able to use abortion victim photography and put those postcards in people's mailboxes. But I would say that, yeah, definitely the pro-choice movement is very active here, trying to thwart the pro-life movement, but with a little bit more lobbying and kind of counter-protesting our events and stuff, not as much violence related.
And in terms of youth outreach and the pro-life movement in the US, we had quite a bit of a focus here. We had Students for Life, we had the pro-life generation language here. In Canada, is there a big youth involvement in pro-life activism? Are there centers on college campuses? Are there efforts really to get young people into the activism fold?
Yes, there is. And I mean, I would say many times we can't compare Canada and the US, they're not equal in terms of the population and demographics and things like that, but absolutely. So there's quite a lot of college campus groups, so pro-life groups on campus. Some universities have banned them, like you're not allowed, you can't be a ratified club, that type of thing. Thankfully, my university, which I'm graduating from this summer, we have a ratified pro-life group. So I've been involved all 4 years of my time at my university, including the last 2 years I was served as president. And there's other groups like the Canadian Centre for Bioethical Reform, which is the largest pro-life activism group here in Canada. I did a couple of internships with them. And the thing that inspired me so much when I learned about them a few years ago is how they're entirely made up of people basically 35 or 30 and under. And I was so inspired by how articulate they are, how they use, the scientific reasoning and logic and images to change hearts and minds about abortion. So they're tremendously active. And then Campaign Life Coalition is another group that have a lot of internships and outreach that they do. And then I would say anything similar to that in the US would be Live Action, but they're obviously way bigger. But yes, there's quite a lot of groups that are involved with activism, changing hearts and minds. Then we have like the pastoral arm of the pro-life movement, which involves all the crisis pregnancy centers. And then we have the political arm, and there's one particular group called Right Now. Their main focus and mission is to be able to get pro-life politicians elected, to be able to bring forth legislation, and then hopefully change things politically. And then we have another organization called We Need a Law, and they're specifically the legal arm, basically trying to change the laws and to basically lobby the government, and working in conjunction with Right Now politically to advance the pro-life movement.
And here in the US and other countries, there are specific big pro-choice groups. Here, it's of course Planned Parenthood, and they really make an effort to lobby politicians to have presence on college campuses and really just to be in mainstream media. I know when the first leaked draft opinion came out with the Supreme Court, there were already ads being run by Planned Parenthood targeted directly at my demographic of young women who would, in a lot of ways, I think probably be scared of what was happening if they didn't have all the correct information. What is the biggest pro-choice group in Canada that really has the most sway, either with politicians or just money wise?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I usually not to I don't like to give pro-choice groups airtime, but it's Abortion Rights Coalition of Canada. So Joyce Arthur has been the founder and president of them for many years, and they're like the biggest pro-choice lobby group, I would say, here in Canada, and they have an entire list of all the the crisis pregnancy centers, and to make sure people avoid them, and they target pro-life groups on campus. Like they did an entire multi-page newsletter about the pro-life club on my campus of what we do, and trying to get us de-ratified, and they try to get people to write my university to try to get rid of our club and those types of things. And they said that unfortunately my university still values freedom of speech somewhat, but there's also more informal groups. There's tons of Facebook groups and people that are really dedicating their time and their efforts to be able to lobby politicians. And unfortunately, when you have very left-wing city councils or MPs or MPPs and things like that, they're not hard to lobby, because when it comes to abortion, they want to score brownie points for the public. And if you want to do that, you make sure that you make life miserable for pro-life activists. So I would say that's what a lot of them do. Very well aware of what they're doing, and they often are organizing counter protests and different things like that. Or even on my campus, for example, a couple of years ago, Unplanned was shown by the Catholic Club.
Yeah.
And all hell broke loose, and the pro-choice group was protesting outside the theater, and then they were lobbying the university president to apologize for the fact that it slipped under their radar that the Catholic Club was showing that, and then all different things like that. So they do try to make life miserable, but I mean, at the end of the day, they don't have God on their side, so they can try all day long in their own strength, and at the end of the day, God has won and will win.
And it's interesting. I remember when Unplanned first aired, that happened throughout pretty much throughout the world. Pro-choice groups were enraged that perhaps young groups would be talking about Unplanned.
Just even having a discussion, right? They're terrified of having a discussion about it. And that's why, with the pro-life activism that I do, my local group with the Canadian Center for Bioethical Reform and my university campus club, it's all about having conversations. And there's so many people who don't want to have that conversation. They're just terrified, or they're angry or whatever, but there's a lot of people who want to have that conversation. It's amazing how you can change hearts and minds through common ground, through analogy, through questions, through imagery, that type of thing. And it really makes a difference. And it's sad, because you think in this day and age of science and technology that, we wouldn't have to show someone that a preborn child is a human. It seems so pedantic, right, and it seems so ridiculous, because yes. I mean, for example, like myself, when I just had my first child, and when I became pregnant with him in my 4th year of university, when I had to tell my, left-wing professor that, I'm pregnant, that type of thing, she wasn't like, oh, what are you pregnant with? She's like, congratulations. And she's using all the language. You're a mom and you're growing a human, all those types of things, which is the very same person who's advocating for abortion rights, So if you yes. want it, it's a human. If you don't want it, it's not a human. So we need to continue to expose that cognitive dissonance and show people that all throughout history, when we devalue certain groups in society and we say that they're not human, horrible human rights abuses happen. And that's what abortion is.
That's such an interesting point, because sometimes we have, gender reveals, and sometimes we have people saying, well, we have to protect the right to have abortion. It's a very strange perspective to have, that depending on whether or not you're set up, you get to have a baby shower or you get to have an abortion. It's a very odd system. In the US, we have quite a few celebrities that always come out as soon as abortion is threatened. And it really has become, I think, a test in Hollywood. If you're not going to come out for it, should you really be supported in Hollywood if you're in that system, whether you're a singer or an actor or whatnot? In Canada, is that the case? Do you see celebrities coming out in support of abortion, or in, unhappiness over the overturning of Roe v. Wade? What's that system like there?
Well, frankly, the majority of the celebrities that are followed in Canada are American celebrities, and Hollywood has a tremendous impact, obviously, in Canada. I would say it's more our publicly or government funded media, like the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. They get a ton of government money. They're the main, source of media that people read, and really sway a ton of opinion and hold a lot of weight. So people are reading, the CBC, the Globe and Mail, those types of things. Even CTV News, and there's different, shows here in Canada that people watch that are pumping that type of stuff. But it's mainly the American propaganda that's coming up with celebrities and Netflix and Hollywood and all of that are pushing this type of stuff, and it has a tremendous impact on people and what their opinion is on abortion, unfortunately.
Yes, and that's very much the case here. I think American celebrities may be responsible for some of the greatest activism work on behalf of abortion throughout the world.
Yes.
And in terms of reaching out to young people, what is the selling line as someone who's involved in pro-life activism on college campuses? How do you start to have that conversation with somebody who maybe is not pro-life or doesn't know anything about it? How do you begin it?
Mm-hmm. There's a few different ways, but I would say with a lot of people our age, activism is a huge thing that, it's a very common thing, whether you're promoting BLM or, environmental rights or animal rights or whatever. So rights are a huge thing that are in a lot of people's, front of mind our age. So one of the ways that I start a conversation with people about abortion is, do you believe in human rights? Kind of just like a starting point, and trying to establish common ground with them right away, because often we think, well, what in the world do I have in common with someone who believes that killing preborn children is fine? Like, aren't they cruel, horrible, heartless people? And I mean, some of those people are very intentional about, oh yes, it is a human, I'm going to kill it. I've met many sociopathic people like that who literally glorify in the killing of preborn children, and they know that it's a human. But there's a lot of people who've just been deceived. So those types of people, they obviously know it's a human. So you need to bring out that information from inside of them. I mean, I can't think of anybody who that I've talked to who in their heart of hearts really believes that it's not a human. We've all read, basic biology textbooks, those types of things. And we know that we've seen ultrasound imagery. So asking them, do you believe in human rights, is a good way to start the conversation. And then ask them, after that, if they say yes, be like, awesome, I believe in human rights too. That's amazing. We have this common ground that we share. And then, next question would be, if two human beings reproduce, what species will their offspring be?
Nice.
Right? Two humans reproduce, what species will their offspring be? Most people will say human. I'm like, absolutely. And then I'll say, if something is growing, doesn't it mean that it's alive? So we can establish that we both believe in human rights, that when two human beings reproduce, their species will be human. If something is growing, which is a preborn child, doesn't it mean that it's alive? And some people will say yes, and people will say no. So you kind of have to navigate according to their answers. But then just say if someone says yes to all those things, then after that, then ask them, doesn't that logically conclude that abortion is a human rights violation? Because we know medically and scientifically that when two human beings reproduce, their species will be, their offspring will be human. A preborn baby is growing, it's alive. Therefore, when someone has an abortion, they're not aborting their own body, they're aborting the body of someone inside of them. So doesn't that logically conclude that abortion is a human rights violation? And then when you kind of go through that questioning, then you can figure out what the person believes, and you can take their path accordingly, down according to what they say. But there'll be some people like you will meet, unfortunately, on college campuses that are especially philosophy students who do not believe in human rights. And so you can have that whole interesting conversation. Unfortunately, we're going more in that direction in our society where only some people should get rights and that type of thing. But, providing that someone at least has a basic understanding of human rights, then you can use this as a jumping point for a conversation. Another thing that's very helpful, depending on whether it's just a private conversation or more in public, whether you have pro-life, imagery with you. You may not have the opportunity to show them some imagery, but just ask them, have you seen an ultrasound image before? Do you know someone who was, pregnant, had a gender reveal? Like, what did you see? And like some of the most ardently pro-choice students that I've talked to, it will blurt out of their mouth and it'll pass, like it'll have a wonderful exodus out of their mouth, and it'll pass their cognitive dissonance in their brain, and they'll be like, oh, I saw fingers, I saw toes, that type of thing. And I'll be like, exactly. So often we think that we have to have answers for all the questions that pro-choice activists will bring towards us. We never should feel intimidated by that, and like you have to be an encyclopedia. You do not. That's one of their tactics. You need to put the questions back on them. Obviously, make sure you answer some of their questions, but then ask them questions. What did you see when you saw an ultrasound? image. Also, some people can be very angry when they have conversations with you. And so if we just go the logical route and just go down the reasoning path, we may be missing their heart and the fact that they had an abortion or someone that they know had an abortion. So that can be particularly, upsetting for them, and they feel like they have to protect that person in their life. So if you ask them, do you know someone who's had an abortion? That's better than asking them if they had an abortion, which I would not do. But if you just ask that indirectly, then they can be like, yes, I know someone who had an abortion, or no, I don't. And then, you can ask them how their friend is doing or whatever, and kind of see if you can go the heart route to balance both. Because whenever we're having conversations with people about abortion, we want to have truth in one hand and love in the other, making sure we're reaching the heart and we're reaching the mind, because we can never do one or the other. That will be a fail. Sometimes one conversation may go in more than one direction than the other. We want to balance the both together. If you want to show people videos, I always try to get them to do their homework, because so often people support abortion but they have no idea what it entails, especially if they've not had one themselves, and they think, oh, it's just this painless medical procedure, whatever, and some very innocent thing, and it's not. So I always show them the video myself, or send it to them, or ask them to look it up. But the baby Olivia video from Live Action, showing the whole fetal development, so they need to see that in case they forgot biology. And then after that, have them watch the live action video clip. It's 11 minutes long, but it is from Dr. Levatino, and it details all the abortion procedures in every single stage of pregnancy. And it's not graphic imagery, it's animation, but it still is graphic because it's showing the child being pulled apart. So they need to see the humanity of the preborn child and then the inhumanity of abortion right after that, side by side. And I found with different people that I've talked with, that's really helped them. And some people, they have no idea what they're supporting when they say they support abortion, and they see those videos and they're like, oh my goodness, and they totally reconsider it.
And that's an important point as well. I think in the past, we've tried to just shout things at people, but when you have the imagery, I've even, as somebody who's always been pro-life, once I've seen other people become so aware of what's happening when Live Action shows them videos on the street, or just people share their testimonials, it is so strange, because it's almost like we've underestimated throughout the pro-life movement internationally how important it is to just show people the reality of what's happening. And, and that's something we need to step up internationally as well. So just sort of in closing, what would be your advice to young pro-life activists who want to start working on this, who want to have an impact? Where do they begin, let's say at the end of high school?
I mean, depends on how old you are, or your experience or things like that. But I would say you can never be too young. And I think it's, especially now as a parent, I will be educating my child on at age appropriate levels about abortion. So especially if you have children, to start young and having this conversation, because so many people, unfortunately, in the church are terrified of this topic and they don't want to address it. But then their children are going to public school and they're learning all this garbage every day. But yeah, one thing would be, to start, basically educating yourself if you're not familiar with, pro-life, strategy and apologetics tools and things like that. One book that I would recommend if someone only has time to read one book, it's called Stuck, A Complete Guide to Answering Tough Questions About Abortion by Justina Van Manen, and you can find it on the Bridgehead.ca. So it's kind of a culmination of the last 50 years of pro-life apologetics put into one book, and it's all in conversational format of real live conversations of my colleagues that they've had with pro-choice people on the streets. And so it's because it's in a conversational format, it kind of models what conversations you can have with people. It's not like a theoretical textbook, which could be a bit dry. So just one book would be this one, but also, just kind of going even on Live Action's website and, their YouTube page to go through a lot of their videos. There's tons of short video clips of how to respond to different pro-choice arguments so that, you feel equipped. But at the end of the day, if you're having a conversation with someone about abortion, you don't know how to answer a particular question, you can be like, well, I never thought of that. I'll have to look that up. Or that's a really good question. And you don't have to feel like an encyclopedia or someone, that could come across as a know-it-all. Because I know some people, they're like, oh my goodness, I'm terrified to go on the streets and have conversations with people about abortion, because what if they ask me something that I don't know an answer to, because I'm not a doctor or whatever. But really, if you're interested in this topic, it's not hard to just kind of learn a few apologetics tools and then go out with other pro-life activists and have conversations with people. So, I mean, depending on, whether you're in Canada or the US, but try to see if you have a local activism group, if you're interested in more the activism arm. If you're a university or college student, find out if you have a college campus group, because, even with the club that I was involved with, every week we would, or every other week, we would have a training session. So we would go through all these different topics. And if you would come to the meetings, you get equipped to know how to answer those questions, and talk with your professors and your friends and your family and people you would talk to while doing activism, and be equipped that way. If you're someone here like, oh my goodness, I don't really want to kind of be involved in the activism arm, that's fine. You can contact your local pregnancy center and see if there's a way that you can volunteer. Even simple things as donating baby clothes,
Right,
makes such a difference, or doing a baby bottle drive, things like that. And even inviting a pro-life speaker to come speak on your campus or your church, those types of things are super important. If you're someone who's very involved and interested in politics, figure out if there's a pro-life politician in your area or your riding or district, whatever, and see if you can volunteer with them or help out on their campaign or things like that. And even if a great idea would be to run yourself if you're interested. And the main thing is to never be afraid and to never back down. And that doesn't mean that you need to be cold and unfriendly and like bombastic and nasty people's faces. You can be loving and compassionate and kind and caring as you should be, but principled, and be like, these people believe in killing preborn babies.
right.
I should never apologize for,
Yes.
and they always say, have you donated to a pregnancy center? Have you done all these things? It's like, if you're just the basic foundation, you're against killing babies, you're way better off than that. Like, that's like a basic thing.
Yes,
You're way better off than that. Exactly. And then you can just go from there. So I would say always try to be on the offensive and not offending people, but like be on the offensive, knowing that God is on our side. We have the truth on our side. We have science on our side, and not be intimidated because they're the ones who are losing. And there's just a lot of blind people that support abortion. And I think for so often the pro-life movement, we've taken a very like defensive stance and kind of apologetic and whatever. And that hasn't got us anywhere, at least in Canada.
No.
So kind of figuring out where your local activism group is or your pregnancy center, get yourself educated, read books, and then see how you can be involved. And honestly, it's so empowering. It can seem scary. Once you start doing it, I find it addictive. And then you just go from there, and you see, because, like here in Canada, there's about 300 preborn babies that are killed every single day. In the US, about 2,363. Hopefully those numbers will be lower now with a lot of states shutting all their abortion clinics. But with Roe v. Wade being overturned, that's a humongous victory in the pro-life movement, but it's only the beginning. We want to make sure that abortion is completely banned, and that no woman feels that she's unsupported or doesn't know the truth about abortion.
Yeah, definitely. And I think those are really important points, because there is a way in for everybody, no matter what your skills. If you want to donate, if you want to volunteer, if you're in politics, there is definitely an area for you within the pro-life movement throughout the world. Thank you so much for coming on. I would say this is one of the most informative interviews I've ever had about any topic. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge. Where can people follow you on social media?
Yes, I'm primarily active on Instagram. So my Instagram handle is Salamon-Vegh, SALAMONHANNAHIRENE. And you can find me on Instagram, and it's kind of mainly where I hang out and share stuff, and share interviews and different things that I'm involved with, because I have a lot of fun things that I've been involved with previously and have coming down the pipe.
Perfect. We'll link all that below. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.